Welcome, 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 everybody. Nice to have you all with us. For Riding the Audio Wave, this session is called Our Podcasts Taking the TV Industry by Storm. That is fighting talk, if ever I've heard it. Delighted to say that we have assembled a powerhouse of evil podcast bosses for you to talk to this afternoon. Before I introduce them all to you, or rather they will introduce themselves, just to say that this is going to be a collaborative 45-minute session. Some of you will already work in the industry. Some of you may desperately want to get a job in podcasts. Whatever your reasons for being here, feel free to send me your questions for any of our panelists. All you need to do is go to the Q&A bit and put your question there, and I will filter them throughout the session. I will be able to see them, and I'll put them to our panel. So let's get to know everybody a little bit. We're going to work round. If you could all give me your names, tell me the company you work for, what you do, but also give us some of the big names, some of the podcasts that either your company produces or that you've worked on. And let's start with the only other woman in the room. Louise, I'm going to come to you first.
Hi there, I knew you'd come to me first. So yeah, I'm Louise Cattenhorn. I'm a commissioner at the BBC. I commission podcasts for BBC Sounds, and mainly working on kind of chatty Ents titles and pop culture music, that type of thing. So not the sort of heavyweight narrative series, although I have done a few of those. Some of the bigger titles that I'm working on at the moment, so the Obsessed With companion podcast. So it's Obsessed With, insert a big BBC TV drama. So the one that we're doing at the moment is Obsessed With Happy Valley, which is really, really exciting at the moment. We're sort of 2 episodes before the end of the entire series. So yeah, there's lots of excitement around that. I've also commissioned a strand called the Inside series. So it's Inside Number 9, Inside the Outlaws, Inside Ghosts. So the sort of scripted comedy that the BBC does. And then I've also done some other work with Steve McQueen's team on a sort of documentary series, podcast documentary series around his Small Axe films. I've worked on a drama, audio drama from the Doctor Who universe, or the Whoniverse, and various other TV companion podcasts for some of the biggest BBC TV shows. So yeah. Lots of stuff on my slate at the moment.
Lots of exciting things. I want to know who came up with the Whoniverse. Great title. Thank you, Louise. Alex, how about you?
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, Alex Bewley. I work at WME, which is a talent agency. I lead our UK sort of international podcast strategy out of the London office as part of a bigger team across LA and New York. And yeah, I represent podcast production companies. So Daryl and What's the Story Sounds is one example, but also work with Gary Lineker's production company Goalhanger, Persephonica, who do the news agents, so a host of production companies, but also talent. So I did the Idris Elba deal with Audible last year. So any clients we represent in other areas that want to get into podcasting, and I sit between the production companies or the talent and buyers like Louise and Declan. So that's the BBCs, the Amazon Wonderies, Spotify's, Apple, and all the new partners coming to the table across both the UK and the US.
Thank you, Alex. Daryl.
So nice to meet you. I'm Daryl. I'm the managing director of a podcast production company, very similar, I suppose, in traditionally to what a TV production company might be. So we're called What's the Story Sounds, and we make podcasts for lots of different people. So we make a show called The Missing, which has been running for a couple of years now, has done very well. We make the Footballers Football podcast for BBC Sounds. We launched a series last year called Faceless, which is for an American platform called NBC. And our content is generally around big, long-form box set series that you can imagine, and those sort of weekly, always-on shows that you get to know and love and listen to on your commutes every week. And I'm sure we'll talk about more about our relationship to TV as we come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Daryl. And Declan.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for including me. So I'm Declan. I head up Wondery International, based out of London, although I'm not there today, so I'm missing the super cold weather.
Where are you? Are you
I'm actually in Washington, D.C. At the moment today. So Wondery, so we're basically the podcast studio that is in Amazon Music. People may know us from a lot of hit shows that we've had, including Dirty John, including Tiger King, Shrink Next Door, or more locally, British Scandal, and a show that we have releasing wide shortly called Stolen Hearts, working with Novel. We also work with Daryl on, as aforementioned, The Missing, which we're very pleased to do. And so we're building out additional kind of original production capacity in the UK. Under Rich Knight, who's leading up our productions there. And then we also represent partner shows. So we have, for example, Smartless, we have Morbid, we have My Favorite Murder, who are also part of the network. And we're expanding in terms of both originals and then looking for additional partner shows to bring on the network. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Declan. Thanks to all of you. Welcome. So as you can see, we've got quite a range of wisdom and knowledge and experience between us. So any of your questions, feel free to message straight away. I can see that a couple of them have come through already. But before we go to your questions, I think what we'll do is we'll get an overview and get a general sense of the lay of the land of podcasts, what the world is like currently before we get into the nitty gritty. So Declan, I'm going to come to you first just to get a sense of where we are with podcasts in the world and what's behind the success of it.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, Anita. Thank you. And it's amazing. So we've got this audio medium that has been around for, even longer than we've had video. But it's really, I think, only recently that we have had, let's say, within the last 10 years or so, as it relates to the US, people producing stories with the intent of creating a audio experience intended for the ears first and foremost, but a really great story, really well told. And, we're in this world where we have consumers who are living in an on-demand world. So they have on-demand video, on-demand transportation, on-demand food. And it was only natural that there's going to be a desire, as it were, for having audio in an on-demand way. And so we're seeing growth and adoption pick up like right across the world. It's pretty heavily penetrated in the US at the moment, where you've got like 48 to 52% who are listening to a podcast once per month regularly. But when we look at the UK, I think figures are around, only, 22 to 28%. So continued, and those are continuing to grow double digits year on year. So continued upside there, which is very exciting for us. And, we focus on kind of what we call immersive storytelling, so that the listener is really transported into the shoes of the protagonist. They're really able to create those images in their mind that they're truly part of the story. And I think it's, gratifying to see audiences reward that with their listening. And then, of course, as we'll talk about later, there's the possibility of adapting those stories, just as you could with novels in the past, into adjacent space medium, including, of course, TV.
So Alex, how exciting is this time for you then? And what have you seen happen from your point of view, your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Declan said. It's a very exciting time because you've got a new medium. We have it's called a literary packaging department within the company, which is all about books to film, books to TV. And that department has been completely kind of rejigged to just general IP now, because so much IP is coming through podcasts. And we're really seeing, the likes of Amazon purchasing Wondery, Apple, commissioning new shows, Spotify doing big deals with TV production companies. So they're all trying to get into this, Amazon with Amazon Studios, and that's just opening up, opportunities within the different departments of WME. So the way we work is I work in the podcast team, but we have a TV scripted department, we have a TV non-scripted department, we have a motion picture department. So there's just more and more ways that we can be connecting clients and companies and individuals within the ecosystem of a talent agency to ensure that they're protecting their IP early when they're going into a podcast deal, and really enabling them to benefit on the long tail with a TV deal, but equally into touring in other areas as well.
I thought I'd wait to talk about money, but is it lucrative, Alex? Obviously, how lucrative is it?
It is lucrative. It's worth saying that, TV doesn't move as quickly as podcasting. Podcasting is a very fast moving medium. And, there's lots of other processes that, TV execs will be more familiar with in terms of a green lighting process and an option period and stuff like that. So I think anyone that's looking to get into the space needs to be mindful of that rights will be kind of tied up for a little while whilst, you know, decisions are being made on the TV side, and that can take a little longer. But yeah, for you know, the longer running podcast series, for really great IP where there's multiple buyers, there is certainly money to be made, especially on the US side.
I'm going to bring Daryl in here. Daryl, you left the world of television to enter the world of podcasts.
That was a brave move, wasn't it?
Yep. And you've never looked back.
I don't know. No, absolutely. I think the reason that I wanted to come across into audio was that there was a definite feeling that there were certain restrictions around TV and how you told stories for television, which really worked. TV producers and executive producers know their audience. They know exactly what the audience of each channel wants in each slot, and it's really defined. But that obviously creates some walls and some boundaries. And what audio enables you to do is to back a story that you think you want to tell, and it doesn't have to fit into a certain box or a certain shape. You can actually make it however long it needs to be. So we made the first series that we did was a sort of classic, could have been an hour-long documentary in television form. It became 10 half hours in a podcast, and we were able to get really into the weeds of it. Other stories we can sort of strip back and tell much simpler. So you have
What
a real...
was that?
That was a series called Body of Proof, which we made for Audible 2 or 3 years ago now. But that's to say, that could have been a simple hour-long documentary, but we took it a different way. And I think what audio allows you to do is to fit the duration of the piece around how long the story warrants. So there are no rules. Louise will say that you can commission a show that's 5 parts long or 15 parts long, or it can run and run and run, and it all depends on how strong the story is. So that was the real appeal, and that's why we moved across.
Louise, I'm going to bring you in as well. And what's the current relationship between TV and podcasts?
So generally for the BBC or
yes, but let's be specific. Let's talk about BBC.
So we're exploring loads of different ways that we can work with obviously TV and audio platforms. So we're exploring loads of different ways that we can work with our TV commissioners. Me specifically, I've got some really great new creative relationships with TV commissioners across the board in loads of different genres. So I've been working really, really closely with the TV comedy team, and we've commissioned some audio pilots, which we're hoping, comedy pilots, which we're hoping will kind of provide a pathway for talent to come through the audio medium and create new formats and new ideas and new content, and then possibly go on to land themselves a TV show. So we're looking at those kind of joined up ways of commissioning with TV, which is really, really exciting. And we're obviously looking at TV companion podcasts in the sense of a fan style podcast or a creator talking about a show as well. So those are the two sort of sides of what I'm working on at the moment.
And has that happened? Has a podcast gone onto TV? Can you give us an example of something that has gone that way?
So we have visualized podcasts which have gone onto BBC Three linear. So our Obsessed with podcast strand, we visualize all our podcasts anyway. So we film all of our podcasts, or the majority of our podcasts, our Chatty Ends podcasts, for social. So we always have cameras in the room and recording while that's going on. But we kind of upped the spec on some of our podcast recordings, and we were able to record a 30-minute cut for BBC Three linear. And that was really, really great way for audiences to kind of jump from kind of finishing watching, say, an episode of Peaky Blinders or the finale of Peaky Blinders, and then move across to BBC Three and watch the podcast where they kind of really, really broke down sort of what went on in that and kind of celebrated the end of the series. So yeah, we've started, and there are other examples as well across the BBC. So Joe Wicks podcast has been visualised. We've also done some work with Jamie and Spencer as well, our Jamie and Spencer 6 Degrees from Jamie and Spencer podcast, where we've visualised that for iPlayer. So there's lots of little experiments really going on across the BBC at the moment in how we can kind of move podcast content to visual platforms.
There's loads of questions coming in already. If you want to put your question to someone specific, then please put their names in. But actually, sticking with you, Louise, we've got a question here that's come from David Sankey, who's the exec entertainment at the Format Factory, who says, coming to podcasts from the unscripted TV format development and production for quiz and game show area of the industry, do you work proactively with entertainment commissioning, or is it reactive? Would you get involved at an early stage if there was podcast potential?
We are, yeah, we would get involved in an early stage. So we, as I said, the relationships now that I've got with commissioning teams in TV, we're looking at what TV teams are, either talent that they're working with or the formats that they're developing, and we're thinking about how that might also work for audio. So it might be that there's a spin-off, there might be kind of that IP or that format can be extended into audio, or it might be that we want to create a sort of companion piece which reflects that program or show, and that's where we can that's where the audience's connection with the show can be deepened, isn't it, when you can have a companion piece alongside a TV show to kind of those water cooler moments where everyone's sort of talking about a show, you can continue that conversation in audio. So yeah, we're to sort of go back to the original question, we are there right at the start of those conversations with TV commissioners about what potential ideas could be extended into audio.
Declan, let's talk about what works and what may work in the future. So what genres are the most successful, and where do you see it heading?
Well, two good questions there. So, I mean, the ones that have worked for us historically, you know, they sometimes get labeled into true crime, but they're not necessarily kind of, you know, love triangle, who murdered whom types of situations. In very many instances, you know, we're looking at systems failure. So, you know, in the case of Dirty John is like, how could someone who, or sorry, in terms of Dr. Death, you know, how could someone who was so clearly incompetent be able to maneuver across the Dallas medical system without censure and can cause tremendous damage and murder patients? You know, in The Shrink Next Door, you know, how could a psychologist you know, breach that bond of trust with his patients and manipulate them for his own ends? You know, we have done We Crashed, where, you know, there's these fascinating stories, and actually there does seem to be a trend of kind of scams at the moment that have gone on, you know, the Anna Delphi one. But, you know, essentially the whole story of WeWork and how it grew and how it imploded upon, because it was really not built on anything other than hope and yoga babble, as Scott Galloway so eloquently put it. So, I mean, I think there's always going to be a fascination for, you know, a story that is well researched, well told, with characters that are drawn out. And, you know, that tends to be where we have specialized more, in those kind of narrative seasons, as it were, often recurring, like Business Wars or British Scandal. So there's kind of new seasons that are continually coming. We don't have as many of those, let's say, comedy and chat pods or banter casts in the portfolio, as it were, but that's not to say that we wouldn't entertain the right proposition and look to develop the right one. But, you know, we're seeing, you know, to a certain extent, we're kind of at the black and white era of audio narrative storytelling. I think there's lots of opportunity for experimentation and developing content for a broader pool of audiences. And that's I think creatively exciting as we look out over the next couple of years.
Sorry, classic, put myself on mute. That is very exciting, and that's incredibly hopeful to think of this as still being the black and white era, because there's so much more to come. Someone has actually messaged to say, what do you look for when you're commissioning a new podcast? I'm going to put that to actually Alex and Daryl, who you're kind of pitching and taking your ideas to different people. So Alex, what do you think works? What do you get positive reactions to? Or are you always trying something new and trying to push the agenda with your talent?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can still push the agenda with podcasting. As Declan said, it's still the early stages of the medium. But I do think there are certain rules that apply both for the sort of conversational and for the shorter form narrative, the sort of limited run. Conversational tends to work better as an always on. So you're doing, you know, somewhere between 45 and 52 weeks a year. And just having real consistency across your programming, you know, in the same way with TV, people know what they're going to get each week. And whether that's, you know, a host on their own, whether with a guest kind of based format, if that's a co-host, you know, just the two people or something like that, just kind of getting that winning formula. And with limited run, I guess it's, you know, access, you know, to a great story that no one else has, if it's been told you know, previously through other mediums, and yeah, just kind of an active story or something like that. If there's something that's, you know, is just breaking in the news, or it's a case that's been reopened, you know, feeling like you're kind of bringing the audience along for the ride. which you just can't do with TV. As we said before, you know, things move a bit slower, so it is hard. Whereas with a podcast, you can kind of just get someone along on the story and do that. So those, depending on kind of which route you want to go down, there's a couple of different options.
Daryl, how do you measure the level of success your podcast has had? Someone's actually got in touch to say, what's the best platform to measure the success of a podcast? But how do you know if yours is doing well?
Do you know what, that really depends on what the aim of the podcast is, because you can create a podcast that has a really loyal but very small audience, and they come every single week and they'll listen. And if that's what you're trying to build in terms of building a community around what you're listening to, then that's been hugely successful. But it may not top the charts or be making lots and lots of revenue. And there'll be other shows that you make which do have that sort of more global, everyone's talking about them, they have their moment, thinking about one or two podcasts that have really emerged, and you sort of think, well, how did that suddenly become that big and everyone's talked about it? And clearly that's successful in another way, but I think it's all about what you're trying to achieve with your podcast. And if it's telling a great story, then I think you can tell a great story, and whether it catches fire or not, that can be successful in its own way. So I don't think there's a particularly a hard and fast measure. I don't know if the other guys would agree.
Louise, someone has actually got that question for you. Is Nick Edwards, who's watching, says, how do you quantify the success of a show? Do you have figures for engagement or listeners?
Yeah, so we have targets on within the BBC Sounds app that, as commissioners, kind of we're aiming to meet. But as Daryl said, it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the show. If you're developing talent, for example, and you want a sort of space for them to develop and grow and build a relationship with the BBC, that is going to be very different from, say, a big narrative set piece that really is there to bring numbers into BBC Sounds and kind of really make an impact with the audience. So yeah, it always has to be about what you're trying to achieve with the content.
I'd also add on that just really quickly, Anita, that if you're looking at kind of top of the charts, I think that's a very different place now to where it was a few years ago. Because if you look at the majority of shows in the top 20, even some of those are daily shows, some of those are doing 2 episodes a week. So if you're going in there with a limited run series, it's going to be very hard to kind of break into that kind of top 10. So I think the charts are still a difficult measure of kind of what is a success, because you're going up against shows that have got multiple listens across multiple episodes. So that's something to bear in mind as well when you're thinking about, well, we want the #1 show. That's not necessarily, if you don't get that #1 show, it's not a bad thing. It's kind of the listening data that you can pull as well from that, which is important.
It's just jumping on the back of that as well. It's really hard for those podcasts that have been up and running for several years. Like you're sort of My Dad Wrote a Porno, which is really kind of there in terms of British podcasts. Like it's almost impossible to touch that now because it's just been running for so many years, and more audiences are finding it over time. So you're already kind of not going to reach those heights if you're launching something new.
But we are still in the black and white era, so there's a way to go.
And you can have, these stories can have like a really long shelf life, and are as relevant, 2-3 years later for all of those new people who are coming into the medium, to find a great story like Dr. Death, or, I was kind of struck by The Prince that the Economist did, which was really this story of how the evolution of China has taken place over the last 30 to 40 years. And, actually, maybe it was #1, I don't know. But, by word of mouth, I've talked to so many people who've also listened to that show. And I think, that's really hitting with their audience. And I think that's a great show told in an entertaining way of the kind of evolution of Xi Jinping and China over the last, 30, 40 years. That'll be as relevant next year. And of course, you can continue with the medium as there are new developments to drop out additional episodes. So not only are the existing subscribers then getting updated information, but there's kind of a longer arc there for new listeners who come in the future.
Oh, I've got a stat. There's quite a few of you want to know about stats about podcasts. I've got one here. 40% of UK podcast listeners are aged 26 to 35. So what are podcasts doing right that the TV industry isn't? How are they slipping? How is that elusive 25 to 35 demographic slipping through TV's fingers, and what are podcasts doing to get them? Daryl?
I was very distracted by lots of questions that were there then. So, Anita, come again.
Just we're talking about the demographic, that 25 to 36, 35-year-old demographic. What are podcasts doing that TV can't?
Do you know what? There's a lot of I mean, tech-wise, there's a lot of things which is it's about capturing you. So when you're watching telly, you're requiring your audience to be engaged, sat there watching the screen, and they go make a cup of tea, they miss bits. With audio, it's not quite the same as that. We've got the tech that's dragging people in, so you can listen in your cars, you can listen on the commute. People listen all different times depending on how their life kind of works. And I find it fascinating to when I speak to anybody about podcasts, I sort of say, well, when do you listen? What's your habit? And you can find people fit that in. I think the way it engages young people is certainly around talent. You've got talent that want to skew young. You've got talent that maybe have actually become known on YouTube or TikTok or whatever it might be, and then they're moving into podcasting. And you think, why aren't you staying with YouTube or TikTok? But actually, this is the medium through which people can listen on the go. They can listen wherever they are. So it's different, and it's got some other challenges. But I think young audiences want to kind of hear these things, and it's so different to linear radio. It's such a different medium that it just appeals to them.
I think that goes back to your, oh, sorry, Anita.
No, carry on.
I think that goes back to your point about kind of the base level of kind of what could make a good podcast is socials play such a big part now, and the ability to, we see a lot of clients that will put, just snippets of what a show is on their socials. That's such a base factor when we're speaking to, trying to source an offer from a platform or a network, to say they've already got this audience, they're going to migrate them across to audio from their socials. It's the same way with it. If you're a book publisher looking to publish a book for a client or a TV production company, socials across everything now are so important. Brand endorsement deals as well, but it works for podcasts too.
Absolutely. I mean, we're doing it with Women's Hour, and we have a very different audience that we can reach via Instagram to what we can on Radio 4. So absolutely living and breathing the socials. So many questions coming in. Somebody said, where is it? That's a good one. We'll come back to that. How do you generate revenue? Here we go. Nyla says, what's the ballpark budget for a podcast? If it were, let's say, a limited run. She's trying to understand what a production looks like. Who should I come to for that? Actually, Daryl, you're spot on for this.
For a limited run podcast, it can completely vary. That doesn't help anybody at all. But I don't know many podcasts that would have a budget of over 10,000 per episode. There'll be some that are considerably, half of that or less, and that's from a big platform. Yeah, there'll be some people making them much less than that. So your budgets are a world away from what you'll be used to in factual television and documentary production or anything in that sphere. But equally, when you actually drill down into doing the budgets, as we found out the first few times that we did it, you can immediately cast off. I think you said, Louise, before that lots of TV companies will make the mistake where they'll have a runner on the budget, they'll have this and that on the budget, and you think, well, I don't need any of those things. It's quite a raw medium where you can one man band it with a brilliant microphone and a good contributor and a nice location. You can get that interview and it can be golden, and it's cost very little. So the budgets are clearly smaller than TV, but they do allow you to have the movement within them to still make them viable. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
I'd love to have shows that were as low as 10,000.
We need to talk more, Declan.
I was going to say, talk to Daryl. He's a bargain.
Well, I just think stylistically, as well, it depends on the type of story that you're looking to tell. When you start getting into, a lot of original reporting and, having to travel and T&E and, really crafting that story and researching and then fact checking and all of that, it can start to creep up. So, it's almost like how long's a piece of string. There are some, that are the affordable kind of Toyotas, as it were. No slag off on Toyota or Fords that you need. And then there are others which are, more of those big impact kind of moments that are very well researched, reported, and they will tend to cost more.
Sandy has been in touch from City University. This is a scoop, everyone. She says, we're about to launch a dedicated MA in podcasting at City University. What would be the key skills you'd need new talent to have? Any one of you could answer this. What do you think, Louise?
So it depends, I suppose, if you're talking about being on mic or behind, producing. I mean, the main thing is kind of a nose for a good story. It's it's the same kind of skills that you need for TV and any other platform. It's that what makes a good story. Are you what do you want to say? What do you want to put into the world? Kind of what have you got to contribute creatively? And I think the starting point is kind of you as a creator. What do you want to contribute? And then what are the things that what are the things that you can do in the audio medium? How can you play in the audio medium in a way that you can't play in TV or in other visual mediums that make that exciting for you? And how can you innovate? So it's sort of really, you need to be a creative person and kind of understand how exciting audio can be. I'd say that's sort of where it starts. I don't think you necessarily need any other qualifications or any other skills, because you can learn all of that stuff as you go along.
This is a big question. Tony's got in touch. I'm going to put it to you, Alex. He's a university student studying podcasting. That's in itself tells you so much, doesn't it, that there's now dedicated courses to it. It says he wants to know the best way to get into the industry.
The best way to get into the industry? Well, I would say launching your own podcast. Trying stuff out, as Daryl mentioned, it's relatively cost effective. You don't need big teams of people. I think the pandemic showed that the technology's come a long way, and you don't need to be going into expensive studios to recording these if you're just starting up. Just be thinking about, we talked about socials earlier, like what's your social strategy early? Don't think about it as in, right, I've got my podcast, now what's the social strategy? Try and offer something that a YouTube audience could get something from, and equally that an audio audience could listen from, because that's a way that you can build up a following of diehard fans that are going to go to new episodes. You can be repurposing content across Instagram, Facebook. You can do deals with them where you can monetize that. Similarly with Snapchat, depending on the audience, that's a great way to be promoting an audio show as well.
And how do you monetize? Sorry, Declan, just, yeah.
No, I was just going to add, I would just add to encourage people to be authentic, to find their voice and to be themselves. It's an incredibly intimate medium, that you are listening, creating pictures in your mind, and you're listening to a host who's almost like a conversation from a trusted friend. And so there are a lot of people who kind of say, oh, I'll do podcasting because I'm really good at this, that, or the other, be it TV or social, etc. But haven't taken the time to really understand the medium. And then there are others who really are very authentic, very genuine, build a really strong connection with their listener, really care about the medium and growing that and serving those listeners. I think that's an important piece to have. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Anita.
No, it's absolutely fine. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm more than happy to be interrupted. The question just follows on from that. So once you go out there and set up your own podcast, how then, Daryl, do you monetize it? At what point can you start making it pay? And how does that happen?
If you've attracted millions and millions of listeners, then people are queuing up to kind of give you money and advertise on your podcast. But I think realistically, that doesn't happen for 99% of podcasters, especially people who are setting up your own podcast. You're making it in the small scale to grow it. I think it's about understanding who your audience is. And that's where I say, if you've got a very niche, very small audience, but it's niche and they've all got a very particular specialism, and you can almost paint a picture of who your listener is, you can start actually bringing brands to that audience, and there will be brands that are interested even on a small scale. So you can make some money from advertising. You're probably not going to get rich overnight doing that, and I think everyone around the table will sort of nod and agree to that. But there are sort of bigger things at play. So there are the platforms that will commission you, just as a TV production company will get a production fee for a commission. So there's value from that. And then we're talking here about IP. So in the way that the TV world is swirling around podcasts for the next big script or the next big story or the next big piece of talent, you're building your IP. And if you can build that IP with value that then the TV world wants, then you can sort of monetize it in that way.
This is a great question from Simon, actually. Declan, Louise, I'll come to the two of you. He says, recording a podcast is low cost. It's easy to record, but actually getting listeners is harder and harder. And it seems to be pop monopoly where only the big names get any traction, and it's becoming a media echo chamber. How can new shows without marketing teams and big names actually get reach? And he's got a great stat. A top 5% global show is less than 100 downloads an episode. So how can you do it? Declan?
I think a top 5%, I think would be more than 100. I don't want to query.
I can't fact check it. It's just Simon's.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, there's no doubt. I mean, when you're, people make the mistake of kind of, putting everything into the creation of the show, and then it's like, okay, now we need to market the show. And I think you've got to be thinking, up front, how you're going to invest in both the content and the marketing, and how are you going to be seeding the market, building relationships with the services that reach listeners, with, ourselves via Amazon Music, via Spotify, via Apple, utilizing the promotional tools that are there that can help surface your podcast to listeners, marketing and cross-hosting with like-minded shows, which is fairly popular within the medium, to see if you can, move those audiences across different shows. And then, look, social is becoming an increasingly important discovery tool. Got people spending a lot of time on TikTok and YouTube and elsewhere, and that's where they can, come across and see or have new shows surface to them. That can take investment from a perspective of paid, but you can also look, at what you can do creatively, organically. But I don't want to undersell. It is a challenge, of course. There's the barriers to entry are low. There's a lot of supply, but there's the barriers to entry to photography are very low. We've all got phones on our camera, but very few people can take, good pictures. Even fewer can tell a story through a sequence of pictures, and only the very best can actually move people from utilizing a sequence of pictures. You almost can say the same with audio. It's like anyone could make a podcast. How many can really make a good one? Even fewer then can probably tell a story over a number of episodes. That is a good story over a number of episodes. And then perhaps even fewer, again, can tell stories that actually move people, that capture people's attention, that kind of emotionally reward them. And that's all part of the skill. I think as you find that, you are able to do that, we'll be able to grow.
Let's talk about America, actually, and because they seem to be sort of one step ahead of us when it comes to podcasts. What's the relationship like over there between television and podcasts? Declan?
It's pretty good. I think what you've seen is, look, there's been a number of shows that have moved from the audio medium, where they had found success and found a fan base, and were more easily adaptable, let's say, to television. I mentioned some of the ones that we had earlier, but you've also had what was it, the Homeland one that was out there beforehand. I think was the Anna Delphi one a podcast first, or maybe around the same time. But there have been quite a number of them. Of course, in the US, there has been a much larger advertising market than there has been in the UK. And to a degree, there was this moment, that serial moment in 2014, whenever it was, where literally there was a story that everybody was talking about in the same way as they talked about something on TV. I don't quite know that we've had that moment yet in the UK. I think that's an opportunity. There have been, Shag Married and, My Dad Wrote a Porn and all that have really been big in the popular zeitgeist, but I don't know if they've been necessarily universally embraced, or a miniseries that has universally hit. So I think that's an opportunity for us to kind of step change listenership in the market.
What are the trends that are emerging, Louise? What are your most popular ones?
So our TV sort of chatty ents podcasts with people talking about TV shows are really, really popular at the moment. But I think the ones that I'm really excited about are the more sort of creative ways of partnering with a TV show. So we have got there's one that I can't talk about at the moment that's going to be launching in a couple of months. But we've taken what I like to talk about is the ingredients of a TV show. So talking about the ingredients and what we can do with that. So that might be the talent, it might be the format, but it also might be kind of research around that TV show, or it might be kind of extra material that TV show will throw up, or themes and topics which that TV show throws up, which we can then jump on and kind of create a podcast around. So yeah, that's where I sort of see the opportunities. It's not necessarily just, talking about a TV show, or kind of the bantercast as Declan talks about, but also kind of what are the ingredients that TV has to offer that you can kind of pull into the audio space.
I'm going to say it's a cookery show, because Louise has mentioned ingredients quite a lot there. Just putting it out there. I'm desperate to know what it is. Daryl, Jane has messaged to say, if you're looking to discover or engage a director or a host of a podcast for a narrative bio podcast, is there a database of the best creators in podcasts? How do you find people?
I don't think there isn't a formal database. If someone come up with one, that would be great, because it'd save me a lot of work. I think actually what you want is somebody that actually wants to be engaged in the story. And we've done projects where you have, you know, a host that comes in perhaps and they're not that worried about the promotional side of things. They want to be a part of the show, but maybe that doesn't quite land. And you'll get other hosts that maybe aren't as well known, but they're really passionate about it. They're talking to their listeners all the time on the socials and going back to the social media side of things. But yes, you want a host who's authentic and belongs within the story, because they're going to bring a lot more to it. But you also want a host that wants to take that story to the listeners and engage with them. So I think you're listening for more than just a voice. And thereafter, I think anybody, you know, if you're casting correctly, anybody can do that job if they really do have a feeling for the story they're telling.
Alex, you're nodding.
No, I completely agree. I think you want someone who, yeah, I mean, exactly what Daryl said. You want someone who's invested in it. And we've seen so many people. I mean, Declan referenced Serial. I mean, you know, no disrespect, but no one really knew who the host was before then, and they had that moment, and suddenly everyone knows. So I think, yeah, there's so many stories of that within podcasting. So yeah.
And Alex, obviously it's your job to try and get things over the line. Where do you look to see what the emerging trends are? Do you look to the States? Do you just keep your ear to the ground? And what do you think is going to be the next thing, or are we still in a world of true crime for the foreseeable?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think a few years, you know, 5-6 years ago, when I started getting into this world, every buyer wasn't quite sure what they were looking for. It was like, you know, they wanted something that was global, but then, you know, local, and wasn't quite sure what genres were hitting. And now we're in a much better place where, you know, I mean, I've spent the last sort of 3 weeks speaking to all the big buyers and saying, what are you looking for this year? What are your
And what do they say?
Well,
what do they want?
I mean, it depends on the buyer. But it's great that we can be a bit more targeted now. So I can go to all of my clients and say, this is what, you know, XYZ buyers are looking for. But certainly true crime is something that everyone's always looking for. And as Declan mentioned, that doesn't need to be, I think the one saying that I heard from last year, which I kept hearing, was true crime, but without the dead body. So that was one. Comedy always does well. News and politics, aspirational business. So sort of entrepreneurialism. That you know, the Diary of a CEO is a great example of that. And there's space for more. I mean, you know, we look after Goalhanger and The Rest Is Politics, and that was the #1 show for the majority of last year. And we also represent Persephonica, and the newsagents came out of nowhere, and they were kind of vying for the top 2 or 3 spots on the charts for, you know, the second half of last year. So just because you see a particular category that's well serviced doesn't mean that there isn't space for 2 or 3 other shows in that. If it's a, you know, original format and a new perspective, then there's absolutely appetite for it.
Yes, carry on, Declan, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, Alex, that was a great point there. I mean, the news agents, I have to say, I mean, that when we think about like, oh, you know, there's going to be new things that are going to evolve. I mean, they have put together just a knockout daily news and insights and humor, but yet serious, and just really, really good blend of kind of what it is you need to know that day, and access to the folks that are involved. And it's been a knockout success, right? I mean, it's continuing to be strong. So,
and also it's different because it's daily, so it's giving us something that no one else has done before. We're like, okay, we can go to this and actually keep up to date with news. We have run out of time, but I really do want just the final sentence from each of you, just because I feel like lots of people here have got so many brilliant questions, and from the questions I can see it's obvious lots of people are trying to get into this space and they want to pitch and they want to. So any just very short bit of nice, hopeful, uplifting advice you could give everyone just whilst we end the session. Louise, I'm going to come to you because I started with you. So
thank you. So for me, it's really about personality. It really, really is. So thinking about the people that we want to be working with are the ones that have really larger than life personalities, to have something really interesting and unusual and to say, different perspectives on the world, and who just are really invested in the medium as well and want to make a success of it. I think we talked a little bit about when we met before the session, that sometimes talent kind of wants to jump into podcasting because they think there's a buck to be made, or because it's a fashionable thing. And I think it's always going back to people that really care about the medium, are really passionate about audio and really have something to say and want to be creative in that space. And it has to be those big personalities, people that kind of fill that space and are interesting to follow. So yeah, that would be my kind of party.
Alex, what would you say?
I would say be proactive. I think, you know, half the battle is finding a great story or a great format. You know, you need to be, you know, finding out who your audience is, emailing similar shows, trying to do, you know, I think Declan mentioned guest spots. That's a really, really easy way and free way to migrate an audience and build an audience. Socials, so just kind of don't just think I've got a great story, I'm going to throw it out into the world and see if it sticks. You know, email buyers, email potential hosts. You know, just really be proactive, because the story is really half the battle.
Thank you, Alex. Declan.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I think also, you know, take encouragement from this as a growing medium. I mean, we talked earlier, it's kind of underpenetrated, so there's going to continue to be lots of opportunity. Think creatively, you know, be true, find your voice and be true to that. And then, you know, I think some of us touched on that, maybe Louise as well, but, you know, it's like, don't just assume, oh, it's going to be easy, because it's just, you know, oh, you know, I've done TV or I've done social and it'd be real easy to do a podcast. I'll just sit in front of a microphone and whatever. It has its own, not peculiarities, but it's its own skill. And kind of learn those skills and immerse yourself in how to tell stories. You know, you can't have as many characters as you have in TV, because the listener has to kind of create them in their mind in a relatively short period of time. So learn some of those technicalities, be true to your voice. It's an encouraging moment for us all, and take heart from that.
Oh, this is good. This is good, uplifting stuff. And Daryl, someone who left telly, now living the dream, making podcasts.
You reminded me, Declan, I always used to say in these things that I'd sort of say that I thought podcasts were just TV without pictures, which sounded really easy. And they're not that. They're a whole different medium, as you say. I think don't be disheartened, because even the big, most successful companies, such as yours, Declan, you know, some of your early podcasts, nobody would perhaps remember what they are. They didn't hit through. And so, you know, even possibly some recent ones that are not always going to be the big hitters every single time. So I think don't be disheartened, but also no excuse not to get out there and have a go and see kind of what you can create.
Excellent. I want to thank you all for being on this brilliant panel, and thanks to all of you for joining the session. I hope you found it really useful. We should meet again in a year and see how far the industry has progressed in that time, and we'll carry on the conversation. And thank you.